I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Today we're going to be discussing cybersecurity considerations for credit unions. So it's a very important topic as more business is happening online, more people are working remotely. These transactions and these interactions are all vulnerable to threat actors on the internet and elsewhere. So I want to start by going over a couple of the usual housekeeping items. If you've been in a webinar, you probably know what I'm about to say. So everyone's on mute during the webinar. So if you have any questions, please put them in the chat box. We are recording this session, so we'll send it out after we're done to everyone for their future viewing enjoyment. So my name is Bill Bowman. I lead the marketing efforts here at Cypher. Been with the company for a little while, making sure I get information out there to cybersecurity leaders about Cypher solutions, which is what we're doing today. Doing the heavy lifting in this session is Scott Krosky. He is an expert on cybersecurity with many years in the field. And leading up to this session, he's done some extensive research specifically to credit unions. So that's the team that's going to be putting on the webinar today. And this webinar is kind of part of an overall effort that Cypher is doing to get the word out there about cybersecurity best practices, to make sure businesses run smoothly during this especially interesting time. So if you want to learn more about the different resources we have, you can go to cypher.com/resource. We have a relatively new podcast that we're doing on a weekly basis where we look at different topics. We do white papers and stuff like that. We actually have a white paper on cybersecurity that's coming out later this month where we're really going to go into some more details, probably include some of what you see today in the webinar and some more stuff as well. So to kick things off, want to know who we have out there in the audience. So if you want to share if you work for a credit union or if you worked for them in the past, or who are you? Why are you? What made you want to attend this session? You can just chat right there or vote right there in the little box. This should only take a minute or so, and then we can start the meat of the session with Scott. So looks like we have a good number in, maybe just 5 to 10 more seconds. So go ahead and end that. So I can just do that. So it looks like we got about a little over 50% are with credit unions, and some people are affiliated with credit unions. Some people aren't affiliated, maybe just here for their own educational benefit. So with that, I will hand it over to Scott to kick off the presentation. Scott?
Yeah, thank you so much, Bill, and appreciate everyone's time, joining our session here today. We hope that you get a lot of good information out of it. So I kind of want to start off the conversation specifically around governance and how exactly credit unions are governed from a cybersecurity perspective. So there's a couple different ways in which you can look at governance. There's the, on the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see the National Credit Union Administration, and really the guidance that they give for credit unions can be found primarily in the Examiner's Guide. As well as in the automated integrated regulatory examination system, or ARIES, the IT exam questions. And those IT exam questions, there's a bunch of different questions in there, but there's a lot of different focus in security. So there's policies, what type of policies you have as an organization that govern your cybersecurity program. There's a component in there that looks at your business continuity. There's a component in there about, endpoint protection for your corporate assets and your corporate systems. So that's your antivirus and your malware. You can think of, there's a lot of different vendors out in that space that provide these services, from an endpoint protection to endpoint detection and response, or EDR agents. There's firewalls, which are obviously a very, normal staple to cybersecurity. But there's also an IDS and an IPS component. And IDS, for those of you that aren't familiar with it, stands for Intrusion Detection System. And then stepping that up one level further is the P for the prevention, so intrusion prevention system. And then there are requirements for penetration testing throughout the year to be done on the network, which is usually a best practice for organizations. And penetration testing can be found in a couple different flavors. There's the your external penetration test, which is anybody on the internet, what they can see, what your footprint is visible to the internet. There's internal penetration testing, which can be done, when you allow a penetration tester access inside your network to begin. And those are really important penetration tests, the internal ones, because they can emulate not only what potential malware can see in your environment, what it can do. It can also emulate the capabilities of potential insider threats, as well as if a threat actor was able to gain access into the initial part of the network, what can they do? How can they move without within your network? What could they potentially have access to? Those types of things. And then there's another part of the penetration testing, which is really important for credit unions to consider, is the application penetration testing. Obviously, a lot of services that are delivered to credit union members are done electronically, so they can log in and get access to their accounts. So being able to conduct a web application or mobile application penetration testing on those systems is definitely important. And then finally, there's the remote access security, and I'm sure everybody that's joining this conference call right now, you're probably working from home and remoting into your corporate network from a secure access solution such as a VPN or another method of being able to get access into the network from a remote location. So those are really the focus areas that the National Credit Union Administration kind of focuses on from a cybersecurity perspective. In addition to that, the U.S. federal government has outlined certain different requirements as well as best practices and recommendations. So obviously, there's if you're not familiar with the Electronic Code of Federal Regulations, Title 12 goes over different security programs for credit unions and guidelines for safeguarding member information, as well as how to respond when there's unauthorized access to member information, as well as required member notices as well from that perspective. So those are good resources to take a look at. FFIEC, I know that it's not directly governed, but FFIEC has the Cybersecurity Assessment Tool, or the CAT, which is a really good resource as well that we recommend to credit unions to be able to kind of review and assess their overall cybersecurity program and the maturity of that program. And then last but not least is the NIST Special Publication 800 series. And for those of you that may or may not be familiar with NIST, NIST is the National Institute of Standards and Technology. It's part of the U.S. Department of Commerce. And it's obviously a U.S. government entity, but they provide standards for many, many different industries. I mean, you could talk about artificial intelligence, bioscience, chemistry, electronics. So the 800 series actually covers cybersecurity standards. And we mentioned before, NIST 853 is really the bottom corner there, NIST 853. It's under the 4th revision. There's a 5th one coming out relatively in the near future. So that's actually a very, very good resource to review, and it identifies all the different security controls that you should potentially, as a financial institution, dealing with a lot of sensitive information and data, to be able to kind of implement as you deploy your cybersecurity program. So those are kind of the governance areas on what best constitutes cybersecurity programs for credit unions. If we move into next, which is the next topic, I think is probably on the top of everybody's mind, is what are the current cybersecurity risks out there? And I have a lot of conversations with C-level executives, the chief information officers, the CISOs that are out there, even CEOs and chief risk officers, even legal counsel. When I have my conversations with these individuals, usually we look to bucket the risks that your organization is exposed to into 3 areas. The first one on the left-hand side is really the technology exposure. So those are the specific, IT systems or IT threats that could affect your organization. So those are going to be the standard ransomware, malware, phishing. A lot of organizations are migrating to the cloud, so we're going to talk a little bit about cloud security today. What happens when you have a third party that's breached, and if they have access into your environment, what are the consequences, or what are some of the things you should be considering from there? Employee awareness and training, mobile application security, online fraud. Those are specific technology exposures, and some of them we're going to talk about here today. GRC is the second bucket, so governance, risk, and compliance. So how do you as an organization have the right policies, regulations, procedures, and how do you govern your cybersecurity program? And we can bucket these concerns into, your brand and reputation. How are you complying with different regulatory frameworks? How do you govern your third parties, and how do you manage risk from your third parties? How do you measure the performance of your organization, and how do you identify fraud? And then finally, there's the future innovation, which is kind of what's coming down the road and how are you able to kind of implement these different technologies and trends as they're beginning to affect not only the IT world, but the implications into cybersecurity as well too. So if we were to look at some of the topics of conversation that we're going to speak to today, we're going to dive into cloud security as well as third-party governance and risk, as well as mobile application security and fraud detection. One of the things, actually, Bill Bowman and I were chatting later last week, and this was actually an interesting news article which popped up on ZDNet, which kind of identified risks based on the current world events for COVID-19 and a significant surge in attacks against banks and financial institutions. And I found that kind of interesting because these banks and financial institutions have traditionally been attacked and been the target of cybercrime in the past. And why the uptick? There could be a lot of different reasons that are out there. It's just because there could potentially be people that aren't working anymore. They need to find a level of additional revenue stream. Maybe it's because remote work is a little bit more vulnerable from an organization perspective, and cyber actors are more successful at being able to attack computer systems when they're not being managed properly. Who knows? But either way, there's a lot of news articles out there that have seen a statistic of potential definitely an increase in attacks against organizations. So those are definitely some of the risks and concerns as we go into the next several months and how we protect organizations and credit unions. So when we deal with third-party risks, I think that organizations in general always partner with third parties. Now, the level of access that you give third parties into your environment can vary based on the type of engagement that you have with them, what kind of services that they're providing. In most cases, from a credit union perspective, a lot of your merchants are absolutely considered third parties, and they bring with them risk. So how do you deal with third-party risk, right? So there's a couple different ways from a GRC or governance, risk, and compliance perspective that you can conduct a due diligence activities on third parties. The first one, and which is kind of the most popular out there today, I would say on the left-hand side of the screen, is the shared assessment questionnaire, the SIG questionnaire. And what the SIG questionnaire does is it's basically an Excel document with a list of requirements from a cybersecurity perspective, and it asks that third-party vendor or your merchant, what comprises your cybersecurity program. You have them fill that out, they complete it, they send it back to you, and then you as an organization would review that and make sure that their security controls are adequate to what your expectations are from them. And again, that varies based on the risk tolerance of your organization and how much access into the environment or the level of data, amount of data that they're processing on your behalf. Are they taking information from your network and processing it on their network? All those different types of questions come into play when you analyze risk to your organization. So the thing about the SIG questionnaire is it's completely reliant upon the integrity of the organization that's filling it out, right? So you're going to take them for their word on what they say in these questionnaires. If you want to step it up further and require a third-party oversight or a third-party attestation that they're actually doing what they say that they're doing, you could request a couple different certifications or reports. You can ask them. One of the ones that are really popular is the SOC 2, which is a service organization control. Type 1. There's different types. There's type 1 and type 2. Type 1 is basically an attestation from a security view on what the vendor says that they do for their program. So these policies are in place. These are the different security controls that we have, but they're just tested for the adequacy. They're just tested for the adequacy of the controls. They're not actually tested to make sure that they're following those controls. The Type 2 report is actually a one-year assessment where the auditor comes in after 1 year and analyzes what the vendor said that they were doing, and then actually the vendor has to prove through artifacts that they actually did what they said that they were doing. So that's a much more comprehensive report, and it validates, from a third-party auditor's perspective that they're actually following the security controls that they say they follow. So you can request your merchants or any vendors that your critical vendors that you do business with, if they have a SOC 2 Type 2 report. If they do, that's great. Ask them to submit it on an annual basis, and then you can review that to make sure that the security controls they have in place are adequate enough for your risk tolerance. And then finally, there's ISO, which is the International Organization of Standards, and you know, the 27001 series is actually a very good certification to have as well too. It's not exactly the same as the SOC 2 report, but it meets the same intention where you have a third party that comes in and attests that the organization is doing certain cybersecurity controls. So the difference between ISO and SOC 2, SOC 2 is more of a framework, and then the vendor gets to pick and choose what specific controls they want to implement, whereas ISO 27001, it's the standard, so everyone's got to do the exact same thing. So anyway, so that's third-party due diligence. So we'd highly recommend, especially on the merchants, that you check in on the merchants and making sure that they're doing their, you know, they have an adequate security program in place. From mobile applications, you know, we've seen obviously a lot of people. This has been a trend over the last several years that you know, being able to provide access for your members into their accounts and being able to see, you know, their account activity and the ease of using mobile devices is definitely pushed, you know, pretty much almost every institution in the financial industry now to be able to deliver those the access to their accounts through mobile applications. And with mobile applications, there comes specific risks. So most of the time you're going to outsource this to a third party to do the development. And again, we get back to the third party due diligence, kind of the conversations we had before. If you're using a third party to develop your mobile applications, you're going to want to ask them those same type of questions that we discussed earlier. But we'd also want to focus on those top risks that we have here. What are their coding practices, and how do they ensure that they're secure and not insecure? A lot of mobile applications are rushed into development, and unfortunately, when they're rushed into development, security is usually an afterthought. You know, it shows, unfortunately, and you know, it causes the application to potentially be at risk. And then finally, the software development lifecycle, or SDLC, which is really important, and you want to check that your application developer is following proper software development lifecycle and being able to develop and incorporate security into that. So the specific recommendations for that, and you know, you can ask the vendor this themselves or ask them to provide evidence of this, but ISO 15408-1 is actually a very good standard around information technology and security techniques for the development of application codes. So that's definitely one recommendation that we have our partners and financial institutions and credit unions recommend that they check their development teams that they're following that standard. Also, conducting an audit of the application on a periodic basis. So, you know, you can do this through a security audit. You could do a code analysis. It's recommended to do it prior to publication, but obviously we understand from a business perspective sometimes that it's more important for the business to get the application deployed and in production environment. So, you know, shortly after it goes into production, if you can't do it before it's published, you definitely try to do a security audit after it's been published, relatively shortly after it's been published. So, you know, you can do penetration tests against it. You can have pen testers conduct the code analysis. There's different ways in which you can analyze the risk of those mobile applications. So we get into another conversation, which is online fraud. And, you know, there's a lot of security techniques out there today to protect your network from different cyber threats and risks. But fraud is a little bit different because fraud can be done anywhere on the internet where somebody can look to impersonate or be able to conduct, you know, take over accounts and act on behalf of a member when, you know, basically take over a member's account and then use that account for nefarious activities. So one of the interesting statistics, if you look in the top left corner there, is the World Economic Forum and the top concerns for 2019. So you could see the top two were obviously, you know, disasters and weather events, but the third one was cyber attacks, which I thought was interesting, that being the third most important concern for organizations. And then fourth is data fraud or theft, and that's the theft of information, fraudulent activity, or gaining access to an account that could be used for fraudulent purposes. So how do you detect fraud? You know, you can detect it through cyber intelligence services, where organizations such as Cypher conduct, you know, scanning activities across the internet to identify fraud ahead of time. You could also incorporate online fraud detection tools, or OFD, that could be deployed inside your network and incorporated into web applications to analyze for risk. And if you look on the right-hand side of the screen here, this is actually a chart from Gartner that identifies the OFD, or the online fraud detection maturity matrix. And if you're looking at and evaluating a vendor that's able to conduct online fraud detection, you want to make sure that they have the ability to conduct more sophisticated analysis, specifically around user login sessions into your application, and making sure that you can validate that that user is actually the real user and it's not somebody else that's using that account. So, your more basic applications will do the static, based identification and rule-based and endpoint profiling. So are they logging in with the same endpoint device all the time? Those are the basics, right? You see those whenever you log in to your account, and it's going to ask you, hey, this is a new login session from this device. Is this a trusted device? That's an example of online fraud detection tools, but those are basic. You want to be able to increase that where you get into the graph analysis and behavioral analytics and actually looking at the web session. So these are things like, how long does the user normally spend looking at these pages inside the application, or how long did it normally take for them to log into their account? Normally this user takes anywhere from 1 second to 2 seconds to put in their login credentials when logging in. Why did it take them a millisecond to log in this time? Right. So those are behavioral analytics that are applied to determine, not only during the login process, but once the login process has been completed and access has been granted to the application, analyzing what the user normally does within the application and then benchmarking it to determine if it's normal behavior. So online fraud detection tools are out there in the market. If you have not incorporated one today, it's definitely something that we would be very happy to have conversations around on how what's best for your organization. And a lot of the vendors that do this today, again, web applications, they typically either deploy a sensor or they inject code through JavaScript or other various means into your web application. For mobile applications, that's traditionally done through SDK. But there's different ways in which they can integrate that into your existing applications. Okay, so moving on. So we talked a little about fraud. We talked a little about third-party risks. One other area is cloud security. So we kind of want to pass it off here real quick. A lot of businesses are migrating to the cloud, especially credit unions. A lot of conversations that I've had, even with CUNA, the Credit Union National Association, it was indicated that a lot of credit unions are migrating to the cloud. So I'm just curious, Bill, if you could kick off the poll here.
Yeah, sure. So thanks, Scott. Yeah, looking at the poll, we're curious, has your credit union migrated to the cloud? And the impact of migrating to the cloud is going to have certain security considerations. So the options, as you can read there, yes, we have completely migrated the bulk of our infrastructure to the cloud. Yes, we've migrated a portion of our data and infrastructure to the cloud. No, but we plan to begin migrating to the cloud. And then no, and we do not have any plans to migrate to the cloud. And then if you don't want to answer that, that's of course fine as well. So I'll give this a couple more seconds. Looks like we're getting a couple more submissions in. So I'll go ahead and end that. And the results are that about 60% of people, respondents, have migrated a portion of the infrastructure to the cloud. Looks like no one's migrated the bulk to the cloud. And then we have some people that don't plan on migrating to the cloud, and a couple people did not choose to answer. So we can see that over half, almost 60%, have some portion of the infrastructure in the cloud. So for those people, or if you're planning to do that, Scott's going to cover some of the things to be aware of with regards to cloud security. So I'll turn it back over to you, Scott.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. And that's great to hear that, we ask those questions so that we can tailor, and I know how much time I'm going to spend on this. topic, and it seems that over 60% have migrated to the cloud. So when you talk about cloud, there's a common theme here where people think that cloud security could be is much higher than if you were to host it on-prem. That's not always necessarily true, and if you look at the incidents over the past over the last several months, it's very clear that a lot of data breaches have occurred based on the cloud environment not being configured correctly. So between S3 buckets and databases being accidentally exposed to the internet. That's not intentional. Sometimes it's a system administrator that might actually set a configuration policy incorrectly. We see if you look in the bottom left corner there from the Department of Homeland Security, an advisory on password spraying attacks, which is one attack technique to take over an account. There's a lot of incidents around security, and you have to just approach the cloud a certain way to make sure that you're operating in a secure manner, and you don't want to find yourself in a position where you're one of those headlines there. So it's definitely a major challenge for 2020 and beyond. Whether you've migrated to AWS or Google, you could have your Office 365 accounts being powered, powering your email. There's a lot of different cloud providers. This is just scratching the surface of ways in which organizations and credit unions are using the cloud. So the bad guys obviously have switched their tactics to follow suit. One of the things that Amazon initially developed but has been adopted widely across the community is the shared cloud responsibility model. And this is where you look at, okay, what is done by the cloud provider from a security perspective, and what is your responsibility from a security perspective? So it is true that when you migrate to the cloud, there are some areas of your security program that are more secure because it's being done by the cloud provider. That's done at the bottom corner, the bottom part of this model here. So you can see the cloud provider is responsible for disaster recovery controls, ensuring the availability of the hardware, the operating systems, the databases, everything that you're using. Obviously, physical access controls into the physical data centers in which the data is being and the servers are running, ensuring that there's proper physical virtual servers employed, that they have constant supply of electricity, HVAC, all the physical security controls that you would normally see in the data center, as well as the servers, the compute resources, memory, CPU, disk hard drive utilization, the amount of storage that's available for you, and then the interconnections between the network and the databases and inside that. But that's where the cloud risk, the cloud service provider's responsibilities stop. At that point, you as a customer operating in the cloud are responsible for any of the operating systems or network or firewall configurations that you implement on top of that stack, as well as that's ensuring the proper patches are completed on the operating systems and maybe web applications, and then identity and access management and IAM, and that's access not only into the cloud platform itself to administer it, but any applications that are being hosted within the cloud, and that's vitally important, is ensuring the proper identity and access management. We'll talk about some of the threats here in a second, as well as what you can do to harden your IAM practices. And then finally, the customer data and obviously any business data that is in the cloud. How is that accessed? Who has access to that? How is it stored? And where is it stored? And all those different types of concerns and questions that go into understanding what your responsibilities are from the data that's actually processed in the cloud. So with that, if we focus on your responsibilities as a user of the cloud, what are those top security threats, right? So a lot of the risks that we see are based on weak identity and credential and access management. Goes back to IAM. We see insecure application programming interfaces or APIs that are used, and APIs are really used to be able to communicate between one technology system and another. So really focusing on the APIs and making sure that they're secure is vitally important. We see a lot of risks around system and application vulnerabilities, the specific applications and systems that are running. Again, you got to make sure that the patches are up to date, the configurations are set in a best manner. I'll show you some recommendations here in just a second about that. Big increase in account hijacking. I'll show you a couple attack techniques around how the accounts are typically hijacked. Obviously, you're never going to get away from malicious insiders, but they're always a risk within the cloud environment. And then the standards that you see out there, the advanced threats as well as the data breaches and data loss. So one of the things that I really like is OWASP, which is the open source web application security practice, and they every year publish a top 10 list of application vulnerabilities. So when you're looking at the application, if you develop the application or if you're using a third party to develop the application, and when we talked about the secure, SDLC, the software development lifecycle, these are some of the specific things that you're going to want to be checking to make sure that the developer of that application is taking into consideration as they're coding. So are they looking at injection techniques into the code and making sure that the code can handle injection attack techniques and not allow them to occur? Looking at authentication techniques, making sure authentication isn't broken, understanding how data is exposed, there's different misconfigurations, so there's different ways that you can check misconfigurations. And then these are some other attack techniques here through cross-site scripting and secure deserialization. We're not going to get into the specific details on how these work today, but just know that OWASP is a very good reference tool to be able to look at, and checking your web application developers to make sure that they're taking these into consideration, and they can address these risks as they're developing the code. So to give you a quick couple of, one example here of an attack. One attack technique is called credential stuffing, and how does that work? So typically, organizations will a third-party organization is breached, and the login credentials for that application are stolen. And we know that almost every user out there has the exact same username and password combination that they will probably use on multiple different sites. So if a third party to your credit union, is breached, and that member's login credentials are the exact same, everyone typically uses an email address now for your login, for your account name, and then the password for the password. That password is stolen from a third-party breach, and then the threat actors will either share that information or they'll use it themselves to be able to attempt to take over another account. And they're going to try those on all the available online applications that they can come access to. And you can guarantee that financial institutions are checked very frequently to see if login credentials could be used to gain access to those sites. And then once accessed, they conduct the scam activities, or they conduct the fraud activities, and then ultimately, can use those credentials to repeat that process against other organizations. So we'll talk about mitigation techniques against that here in just a second. But let me just pause. One more question we just want to ask, just to understand, because we're going to do one more threat example against ADFS. So I just want to understand how many people are using ADFS, and if we need to spend a lot of time on it or not.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. So this is Active Directory Federation Services. So like Scott mentioned, he's going to touch on this topic. So if you want to let us know if this is something in your technology stack in your program, you can just put your response right now. So yes, we use AFDS completely in the Azure cloud. Yes, we have a hybrid architecture with Azure and on-prem Active Directory. No, but we plan to begin migrating soon. And then no, we don't have any plans in the foreseeable future to migrate to ADFS, and then you can choose not to answer. So looking at the results, we have, let's see, looks like we got about 20 to 25% of the people are using or plan to use it. We have a lot of people that choose not to answer, which is fine. So I'll go ahead and end the polling. So Scott, yeah, you can kind of talk about that in case people are curious about what it is and the security considerations in case they decide to make the change.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, we appreciate those the responses there. It helps me gauge how much time I'm going to spend on the topic. So with that, Active Directory Federation Services, or ADFS, there's an attack technique called password spring, right? So the user, in this attack technique, the user doesn't necessarily know what the password is, but they can guess the username, just because it's very simple to find a username on the internet through just email addresses. There's a lot of email lists out there, so they basically take those email accounts and attempt to guess the password. And what you see here is the authentication server has the stored, secret, or the password in this case, that it's checking for each login session. And in the case of all these different attacks, most of the time these attacks are not successful, but every once in a while they will be successful. So not only could you potentially gain access to an account by guessing, and a lot of individuals use basic passwords out there for their to gain access to their accounts. But if the setting is not set correctly in ADFS, you can actually cause that user account to become locked out. And from that perspective, a denial of service condition exists where a threat actor has blocked the account and the legitimate user is not able to log into that account. So Microsoft at the very bottom here has very good recommendations on how to defend against these types of threats. So we'd recommend checking those for the best practice as well. One other thing here, so how exactly do you harden your environment? I prefer personally the Center for Internet Security, or CIS, which has a wide array of recommendations for organizations to harden not only the operating systems, the servers, mobile devices, desktop software, but they also have the cloud provider recommendations as well too. So these are free. You can go to cisecurity.org and download those. And basically what you're looking at doing here is if you are operating in any of these environments, go ahead and download that benchmark. And then from there, like this is an example of the Amazon Web Services security benchmark. The benchmark will detail all the different hardening practices and recommendations for you, and it gives you step-by-step instructions on how to implement that as well as test it to make sure that it's been implemented correctly. So here, as you can see, a lot of those attacks that we just discussed can be thwarted or prevented by implementing multi-factor authentication. There's different IAM password policy requirements that should be enabled. You can see in here, there's also how do you protect the administrative privileges as well as logging. And logging is really, really important. So you can harden the environment and you can harden the identity and access management process, but you also need to be able to log correctly so that your security team, and if you've implemented a third party to monitor the environment from a security perspective, you need to make sure that logging is enabled correctly so that you can have visibility in what's going on inside the network. And then how do you effectively monitor that network, right, for security risks? All right, so I think this is the last question here for cloud security, and then we're going to move on to our next topic.
Yeah, so if anyone wants to answer this question, to let us know what cloud services you use, that helps us know, what's popular out there, what to focus on, and Scott can touch a little bit on the results to give any tips or anything like that before we move on to the next topic. So just give a couple more seconds. The options are as you can read, Amazon Web Services, AWS. Google has some cloud platforms, Microsoft Azure, and then others. So we have some other options out there as well. So looking at the results, we can see that about 60% of people are on Azure, about 20% Amazon Cloud, 10% Google, and then another 10% or so use another platform. So.
Yeah, and that's good. And that's good information. So, for those of you that are using those cloud environments, I'd highly recommend that going to the Center for Internet Security and downloading those security benchmarks and implementing as many of those security controls as possible. You're not going to be able to implement 100%, but if you can hit around 70, 75%, you're going to be in a much better situation from a security perspective. So I want to talk a little bit about, how do credit unions and organizations partner with third parties, managed security service providers to be able to monitor that environment. Cypher has deployed a solution for this called CypherBox, and CypherBox basically is a set of sensors that hook into various different environments that are designed to be able to monitor the environment, collect the data, collect all the different log sources inside the environment, analyze that for risk. Once those risks are detected, then the response activity occurs where either through automation and orchestration that's been arranged with us and the provider or the customer, or just notifying the customer on what the response activities should be going forward. That's the way in which the SIM process works. And this is done 24/7, staffed by a security operations center. And basically you're outsourcing the tier one and in some cases tier two security analysis and triage to that provider. And there's a lot of benefits that are associated with that. It's usually a lot less expensive than having to stand up your own security operations center and staffing it with 5, 6, 7 people, as well as giving you the ability to focus on more strategic and more important initiatives within your organization. So that's kind of CypherBox, and we've designed CypherBox specifically in mind, not only to integrate with your existing on-premise equipment, and the traditional server racks, basically it's installed in an environment I'll show you here in just a second, but we've also integrated it with cloud environments as well too, because so many organizations are connecting and migrating to the cloud. And we've actually got here's the network architecture here. So basically the deployment of a sensor, the sensor can be deployed within your customer office if you have equipment in there. We just ask the customer to provide us with a VMware Hyper-V instance, and then we can deploy the sensor from that perspective. Within AWS, it's registered within AWS, the CloudFormation stack, so we can deploy quickly from the CloudFormation stack. We talked a little bit before about logging. So, out of the box, it does the CloudTrail, S3 bucket access, and ELB access. But, if you've enabled guard duty, you also have the ability to look at the VPC flows as well as the DNS logs. And that gives us a good visibility as far as, security is concerned in an AWS environment. Very similar situation for Microsoft Azure. It's available through the Azure Marketplace and out-of-the-box collection capabilities. We're looking at the REST monitoring, the security alerts, the SQL Server logs, IIS logs if you have IIS enabled, Windows logs, and obviously the Active Directory logs. And then finally, Google. There's a Google Cloud Platform integration with an API that's looking at the logs as well as Active Directory in Google. Some of the detection examples, this is by far not a comprehensive list. It just gives you an overview of some of the more, some of the more frequent risks that we see inside customer environments after we've enabled CypherBox is, within AWS, the IAM rule access failure, obviously the brute force authentication, which could be a sign of the password spray attack, administrative user permission modifications. If someone's been added to an administrative group, that's important to know, especially if you're a security practitioner and you're auditing who on your team should have access to elevated privilege account. Looking at credential abuse, again, that's online fraud detection type activities, and are these normal login locations? Is this normal login activity? Those types of things. Different policy changes, potential data exfiltration or malware infections, as well as we see scanning activities. I see a lot of activity where crypto mining is installed inside a cloud environment. Sometimes it's done by the IT administrator. Sometimes it's done by a criminal actor that's already gained access into the environment, and they're trying to use the compute resources to be able to profit through that method as well. And then, I think the next one down there, S3 bucket block public access disabled. That's a really, really important one because you don't want your databases exposed to the internet, as well as other different detections. So this is just an example of how that works. When we designed CypherBox in mind, we've mapped it to NIST, which is we talked about NIST earlier, but the cybersecurity framework really has 5 main families in which you look to be able to deploy a cybersecurity program. So how do you identify what's on your network? How do you protect what's on your network? How do you detect risks? How do you respond to those risks? And how do you recover from those risks? So when you look at the service catalog for an MDR provider such as CypherBox, from an identification perspective, it has the ability to be able to identify assets on the network through an asset discovery process. And this gives you that full visibility into what devices are connected to your network and what kind of instances are running even in the cloud environment. So that's important to know what's on your network because you can't protect something if you don't know it's there. Also, vulnerability assessments are done on a quarterly basis. So we work with our organizations that sign up for CypherBox to be able to conduct a vulnerability assessment, give them reports that be able to identify what's on the network, as well as any kind of risks that are associated with those systems on the network. And we review that with the organization and make sure that they're comfortable with the reports going forward so that they can address those. service catalog for detection. Obviously, the SIM is a critical component to the MDR service. So being able to conduct real-time event collection and correlation and normalize the security logs across your entire network is really important. And then through that, we can detect potential risks against the organization. We notify you through email as well as a Cypher portal ticket, which as a customer you get access to the Cypher portal. We also conduct network intrusion detection, whereby you send us the network traffic inside your network, either through a span port or tab. We prefer span, and be able to analyze the network traffic in and out of your network when looking for risks. We also deploy endpoint agents to be able to identify on the endpoint potential risks against those endpoints. So an example of the detection piece here is, potential through that endpoint agent. We see some kind of a malware infection or something like that against an organization, and our analysts have the ability to conduct further information through that agent for analysis, such as finding out what users are logged in, what are the services that are running. We can request registry key settings and identify potential risks against that system. We also have the ability to disable that system as well or shut it down. That's the basic endpoint agent. We can also partner if an organization wants to co-manage or also use an endpoint detection response or endpoint protection solution. There's a bunch of them out there, but either through like FireEye or Carbon Black or different organizations out there that can provide those, we can deploy those as well to be able to integrate into the system. And then we also give, from a detection perspective, a lot of organizations will request, how many, they would like to request the logs that were collected, or maybe security events that occurred. We keep that information for up to 1 year, so that the organization can then go ahead and retrieve that information. So it's just a couple examples.
Scott, this is Bill here. Just wanted to kind of give a mention that if any of this is interesting, we are offering a free proof of concept for CipherBox. So if you're seeing some stuff that you think would be helpful for your organization, I encourage you to reach out to one of us. We can go to cypher.com/free trial to get started with that. And if you have any questions about what you're seeing throughout Scott's presentation, feel free to put them in the chat and we'll address them at the end. So just wanted to interject with that. So back to you, Scott.
Yeah, absolutely. And I noticed I haven't got any questions here yet, which is fine. But if you guys have any questions, or ladies and gentlemen that are on the call here, if you could just send us questions that you'd like us to answer, we can go ahead and answer those for you. Just to finish up here, and appreciate that, Bill, to let everybody know about the free trial. I think that's important. So from a security log perspective, just a couple examples, who has access to the S3 bucket, we can provide that information over to them. Or maybe if you're using Office 365, when was the last time this person accessed their account, we can provide reports on that as well too. That's just an example of some of the security log search. We also have response to threats. So in addition to the standard alerting and some of the response activities we talked about before, we do have the opportunity for our organizations to be able to request a Cypher attendee as part of a teleconference or a video teleconference to either address a specific identified vulnerability that's been seen or a potential security incident that's identified. And really, I think that's important because we look to partner with our organizations and be part of their security team. So you have access to our security resources to jump on any of those calls as well too that you need. And then, we also focus on collecting threat intelligence. So we not only have our own organic threat intelligence, but a lot of organizations are now using IoT devices. We haven't really touched a whole lot on IoT in this conversation here. We do have podcast topics about IoT and IoT threats, but we're focusing on a lot of collection of threat intelligence sources and sharing it with the greater community. And finally, just to kind of finish things up here, we're close to a little about 45 minutes into the presentation. We usually spend a little bit of time at the end here for answering questions, but we just want to finish up with, why partner with Cypher. So for those of you that may or may not know about us, we are a full solution service provider. We govern we identify our security offerings through 6 main areas. On the left-hand side of the wheel, you'll see those project-based or professional service engagements. Red team services, we have ethical hackers, penetration testers. We do secure code analysis. also event, forensics and investigation. A lot of that's done through the red team services. We have governance and risk and compliance consultants that are able to come in and assess an organization's maturity against a certain risk framework, such as NIST. We can also do ISO 27001 certifications, as well as PCI. We are a QSA as well as a ASV, so we have the ability to certify and assist organizations with PCI compliance. We also do the cybersecurity technology integration, where we come with a set of work with our customers and our credit unions and our financial institutions to be able to identify specific security tools to be able to be installed inside the organization, so we can make recommendations from that perspective. So those are project-based services. And then on the right-hand side here are those managed services, and these are those 24/7 security services that are provided by our Security Operations Center. So the Managed Security Services, or MSS, we've been in the business there for quite some time on MSS. MDR, which is the Managed Detection and Response. So I talked a little bit about earlier about Cypherbox and our capabilities there around monitoring and detecting risks. And then finally, Cyber Intelligence Services as well too. So analyzing what's out there on the internet and attempting to potentially prevent certain risky activity from becoming a realization against your organization. So, looking for threat actors that are engaged in counterfeiting, maybe doing cyber squatting or DNS hijacking, standing up domains that look very, very similar to your domain, identifying that to you and then working with you to be able to take that domain down, as well as monitoring your brand on the clear web as well as the dark web. We are highly credentialed, so we've been in the business since 2004. We started off as an MSSP, and just kind of what you see on the screen here is a list of our certifications that we have from our global locations. We have 6 security operations centers. One of them, we have one in the United States, headquartered in Miami, Florida. We have a couple in Latin America. We have 3 in Latin America, and then 2 in Europe as well. And these are the different certifications and accreditations and affiliations that we have. I did also mention that we are a PCI QSA, as well as an ASV, and have our certifications as well for ISO 27001. And then finally, just to kind of let everybody know, we're happy that we've been mentioned multiple times in Frost & Sullivan, Forrester, so you can do some research on kind of where we are, where we're at in the world for cybersecurity vendors that are out there. And with that, I think that's been a solid 50 minutes for the presentation here. I'll pass it over to Bill to wrap it up.
All right, thanks, Scott. So I think we definitely covered a nice overview. We started out talking about some of the frameworks you can use for cybersecurity. Then we dove into some of the things that you can do on your own as part of your own initiatives for a credit union to secure things. And then we wrapped up with some of the services that we can offer if you feel like you need some outside cybersecurity assistance. So with everything, we want to see. Get some feedback to did you get what you wanted out of it? If you did, mark it there. If you didn't, you can mark it there too, and let us know what you were looking for in case that you did not get the information that you came to see. So we'll just kind of hold this for about 10 seconds or so. Again, if anyone has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat box. Haven't really seen too many coming through, so I guess that means everyone kind of is satisfied with the information. But yeah, if you have any questions about Cypher, Cypherbox, credit unions in general, feel free to put them on there. As I mentioned before, we are offering a free trial proof of concept for Cypherbox. What that entails is we'll talk with you about your network and your cybersecurity posture and kind of what you have going on in your system, and we'll actually set you up with our SOC and get some reports going and get that protection going for around 30 days. Then after 30 days, we can evaluate if if the experience has been beneficial for your cybersecurity, and then we can talk about whether it makes sense to continue or not. So it's no obligation. If you're interested, I put the link in the little chat thing, and we'll do that. So looks like we're about out of time. So I want to thank everyone for attending. If you have any questions, like I said, you can contact marketing@cypher.com, leave a message in the chat. There's a lot of ways you can get in touch with us. We'll be sending an email with this recording out to everyone, hopefully by later today or early tomorrow, so you can check it out again. Well, it looks like, actually, I guess I should, we do have someone with a question. So Richard, if you can probably be easier if you can just chat that question in, and we can address it right now. If I see you raised your hand, or you may have just mistakenly hit the raise hand button. All right. Well, Richard, just, yeah, if you can email marketing@cypher.com if you have anything, and we can go from there. I want to thank everyone again.